What? You never pretend you're driving your boat while you're sitting at the dock? Your wheel's probably attached to your boat though, so it's time to do something about that. Those of you who are following along, you know I got the engine started. Maybe now it's time to get a helm so I can actually steer it. Hello and welcome to Travels with Geordie. My name is Peter and this good-looking fella here is Geordie, and we live together on this wooden motor cruiser here in Victoria, British Columbia, all the while fixing it up for some pretty extensive cruising someday. If that's the sort of thing you might be interested in, please consider sticking around and subscribing. We'd love to have you. I'd also really like to take the opportunity to thank my patrons, whom without I really wouldn't have the ability to do this every week. Thank you all so much. And for those of you who would like to win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt, stick around to the end of the episode and I'll show you how you can do that. Cheers! Let's get on with it. Alright then, for those of you who haven't been following along, the helm on this boat used to be on the port side, and I'm moving it to the starboard side for a handful of reasons we can get into another time. But that means building an all-new helm, and an all-new helm console, and an all-new steering situation, which is what we're talking about today. Isn't that a good idea, pup? What do you think, puppy? Good idea? Alright then, so here we go. It's going to be quite a small helm. It's 24 inches wide. And that's all I need. I've designed it all. The cabinetry will come out here, and the instrument panel and the Morse controls, and the wheel will sit right here. Now, the fine-tuning of all that is yet to be determined, but basically I'm going to design it so that the mechanism for the steering, the helm itself, is permanently mounted to the bulkhead, whereas the cabinetry can slip away so that if I ever need to do maintenance to it or repairs or emergency repairs to it, that, or also all the electrical switches and instrumentation for the engine will all be fully accessible with the cabinet just swinging away. So the neat thing about that is that I can locate the steering wheel and the steering wheel shaft in advance of designing and certainly building the helm cabinet. So it's going to be about here, but more on that later. Let's talk about the type of steering. Boats this size really only have two, maybe more, but two principal ways of controlling the rudder from the steering wheel. The most obvious is hydraulic, and that involves a hydraulic pump that basically the wheel attaches to, and as you turn left it pumps oil down one direction, down one pipe. You turn right, it goes the other direction, and back in under the cockpit sole there's a hydraulic cylinder which actuates a lever on the rudder. That's pretty straightforward and pretty common, and it's what a lot of people like to do. I don't want to do that for a bunch of reasons. One is that you get helm drift. In other words, see this little knot work on here? That tells me when my rudder is centered, which is nice. It's a tactile thing, I can see it. Yes, I could use a rudder indicator gauge, but it's not the same thing. It also means I have another layer of complexity, something that can go wrong that can't be fixed super quickly and easily, which cable and chain, which is the other option, does seem a lot simpler. There's two more reasons. One is that hydraulic is crazy expensive, and two, I have almost all the stuff to do cable and chain. Let me describe a cable and chain steering setup. Alright then, so the two major components in I'm calling it cable chain, or maybe chain to wire rope or whatever, is a way to convert turning the wheel into pulling the cable, the wire rope in one direction or another, and that's done with this handy dandy little beauty right here. Now this is actually an existing piece that was on the boat. I have two of them. Now this mounts to the bulkhead right there, and the steering wheel mounts right onto that, and this large sprocket here rotates around with the shaft and carries the chain, and only enough chain. You only need a couple of feet of chain, because as you rotate the chain you can only turn the wheel so far, and then the chain switches to wire rope and goes through a series of sheaves all the way to the back of the boat where it connects to the quadrant, the other major part of the chain to wire rope steering system. And the quadrant basically rotates the rudder. Isn't this thing gorgeous? All bronze. A little backstory. The reason I have this thing is because the original steering on this boat was a bit bugshy. Basically, it sat with a long chain that went down into the bilge and drove another sprocket on a long drive shaft that went all the way along the side of the boat, the port side of the boat, with a couple of U-joints to go around the corner, where it attached to an old tractor steering gear, which had a pitman arm on it, which pushed a tie rod over to a pitman arm that was on the rudder shaft, and that was a lot of joints to fail. In fact, it was extra complicated because there's an upstairs helm, which have another one of these and another chain down to that same drive shaft. So the slop and lag and failure possibility was just out of this world. So it's gone. But as a result, these are perfectly usable for what I intend to, except for one thing, which I'll get into in a bit. Okay, let's have a look at the business end of this. Some of you will recognize this quadrant. So this is my rudder shaft going down through the bottom of the boat. And this quadrant is not original to this boat. I'll put a link in the description to the episode where I cut it down. Anyway, I bought this on eBay. It came from Texas. I'm really pleased with it. Very hard to find a quadrant that would fit here that was also set up for a square shaft. It just barely fits in. I had to trim most of that member out, but that's not really a concern at all. So the point is, the stainless steel cable will come along here through a sheave and then ride in the groove on this quadrant. Now if you look at this quadrant, it only has a single groove. Some have two grooves which keep the two wires separate, but more on that later. Anyway, so it will rotate 180 degrees, through 90 degrees. So it's 45 in one direction and 45 in the other. For those of you who are concerned that I need some bump stops, end stops, I definitely do, and I'll arrange something here. In fact, this will probably be trimmed off a little less in time. Okay, so that's the quadrant and how the cable is going to ride on it. We're going to do an unboxing. An unboxing, puppy. Don't want to watch? Okay. Alright, so let's see what we got here. It's certainly heavy. Let's open this from the bottom. And in here we have, lots of beautiful sheaves. A couple different sizes, a couple of different types. Small ones for where the cable just makes a small turn while it's moving along the side of the hull, and big ones for where it really counts and you have 90 degrees or so of tension through there. These are really quite nice, and they come from a company called Block Division, and I'll put a link to them in the description below. Now these are zinc plated, galvanized, not galvanized, just zinc plated with bushings. Which are very nice. Now these same blocks are available in stainless steel for 5 times the price. So I'm going to call this a proof of concept. If this all works, the exact same size sheaves, I can replace with stainless, all the bolts line up, and in time I can replace them. But will I do that? I don't know. Anyway, look at them all, look at them all! Okay, also arriving yesterday was this other box, which I think I know what's in, but let's have a look. And another key element to the project. Yes, indeed. If we open this up, there's the stainless steel wire rope that we're going to use. Now this is nice stuff. Okay, so when you choose wire rope for an application like this, it's very important to realize that there are lots of flavors of wire rope. First thing is the material. Yes, it's stainless steel, but it's 3/16 stainless steel, which is not quite as strong, but it's 3/16 of an inch. That's interesting. It's 3/16 stainless and it's 3/16 of an inch, which I don't know what this is rated for. Several tons. There's no way I'm going to break that, but it's more corrosion resistant and more flexible than 304, which is more common. But more important than that really is the composition, the makeup of the individual strands. This is what they call 719. There's 7 bundles of 19 strands, which is an awful lot of wire. 7 times 19 individual little fibers, which makes this much more flexible than some. And that is important for repeatedly going around these corners. Yes. Love it.
Okay, so here's the basic components. First, a chain sprocket, which is turned by the steering wheel. And then attached to the rudder is a quadrant, which is basically a quarter of a wheel with a groove in the edge of it for the wire to ride in. Next comes some sheaves or pulleys to redirect the wire on the way back to the rudder, and then the actual chain that rides over the sprocket and to that we'll attach the wire rope which weaves its way through the sheaves and eventually around the quadrant. Note that the cable traverses the whole groove of the quadrant and is attached on the far side. That way each cable is always riding on the very circumference of the quadrant as it turns. So now if we turn the wheel to the right, it pulls on the left side cable, turning the quadrant to the left and the rudder to the right, and we turn right. Okay, I have to think about the steering geometry a little bit. In other words, how many turns lock to turn the rudder from hard left to hard right. And that's calculated by the total turn of the quadrant. So the rudder wants to turn about 45 degrees in each direction. In other words, lock to lock would be 90 degrees. And we know that the quadrant has a radius of 10 inches. So let's do a little trigonometry. So to find the total distance the cable must travel to turn the quadrant through a quarter of a turn, we'll use the circumference formula, which is 2 pi r. So that's 2 times 3.14 times the radius of 10 inches, giving 62.8 inches. But again, we only need a quarter of the full circle, so that's 15.7 inches of total wire travel lock to lock. Okay, so let's look at it at the steering wheel end now. The sprocket that is on the existing helm shaft is 4 inches in diameter, giving a radius of 2. So if we plug that back into the circumference formula, it's 2 times 3.14 times 2, giving a full circumference of 12.5 inches. Well, that would mean it's just over 1 turn from lock to lock, which is a little bit too quick. So I have ordered a 2-inch diameter sprocket that fits this shaft and fits the chain. So it's 2 times 3.14 times the radius, which is 1 inch, giving me 6.28 inches. And that is great because that gives me just about 2.5 turns lock to lock.
All right then. Well, I've given an unbelievable amount of thought to the geometry and the ergonomics of where the helm is going to be positioned. And I'll try to summarize it for you a little more quickly because I have years in this. Anyway, this is the arrangement aboard my friend's boat, MV Zephyrus. And I can tell you the helm, the steering wheel is way too low, especially once you stand up. When you have to spin the wheel, it's a deep reach to be able to get around that. And it just is uncomfortable. This cheap director's chair is what we use to sit at the helm on that boat, and it's suitable, but it's way too low on this boat. So, first thing I need to do is get this up to the point where I sort of feel I'm in the right position on the boat. All right. Okay, so I am not going to show you the ridiculously precarious arrangement I have this chair sitting on. Suffice to say is that it's ridiculously precarious. Okay, now I feel I like this height. This is exactly where I want to be when I'm driving the boat. So then I say, where does the wheel go in relation to that? Well, ship's wheels, boat wheels, like being on a horizontal axis like this, in other words being straight up and down like this, unlike a car where you sort of have it like this, a little short on knee room, right? So it'd be nice to have it about here, except you couldn't turn it. So it's got to be beyond your knees and far enough beyond your knees that you don't get into too much trouble. Now, fore and aft, I haven't really got that set right now. The chair may not be in the right place. We're only doing up and down for now. But it's going to have to be about here. And the idea being that, so when you need to make a full spin of the wheel, you don't run into your knees. So if you grab the wheel and you want to be able to spin it right around, it's got to be at least about that high. Right about there. That'll do for now. And that is right about there. Okay, so there we go. Now that's really, really high. In other words, how am I going to build a helm where I need instruments and stuff like that, where I can actually have this gubbins basically right there? It's not going to happen. So I need to compromise. Now there's a couple of ways I can compromise. I can lower the wheel in relation to me, or I can sit lower. You've got to play with this a little bit. Can I get away with this one more time? Okay. So, if you can see, this little piece of tape with the word stand on it is my eye height when I'm standing at the helm. Because of course, a lot of the time you're operating the boat, you're standing. So it's important that relationship to the wheel is also suitable when you're standing. So now I'm going to put another piece of tape that is at my eye height when I'm sitting at least in this version of a seat. And that's about there. So that looks like about 4 inches. The relationship between sitting and standing and the wheel is not that crucial. 4 inches shouldn't make a difference because when you're standing, of course, your knees aren't in the way. Am I thinking about this too much? Iced tea. I'm a bit of an iced tea junkie. I like it. I like it. I like it. I like it. Okay then, after much deliberation, some head scratching, some tape, a little bit of a doodle, and of course, consulting with Geordie. Hey, where should the wheel go, buddy? I have determined that 38 inches is the magic point. The ideal being way too tall to fit inside the helm, way down at Zephyrus level is just way too low. I've experimented with a couple of different sitting heights and standing. You know what? It's true. I know what you're saying. I'm putting way too much thought into this, but it's the way I am. So, okay, at 38 inches, I can barely get all this gubbins up underneath the instrument panel. Okay, so these two are going to go here. These two go here. Okay. And there we go. It's a mock-up. Don't be too judgmental. It's a mock-up. But it's got to be robust enough because this mock-up will last through the entire setup of the cabling and the chain and actually to get it to a working point. And then all of this will be rebuilt in something much more robust. Okay, I know what you're thinking. Why is it sticking out so far from the bulkhead? Well, that's because the Helm Cabinet is actually quite deep. It's going to be 1 foot deep, and it's partly based on what happens when this door is open, because I already have a restriction to this point. I might as well use up all the space, largely. So that gives me 1 foot. There's a couple of other things. It gives me more storage because there's going to be storage down below. And right below where you are on that side, on the port side, there's going to be another matching cabinet. And the deeper that is, the more storage you get out of it. And it works well with the way that side of the boat is working and this side of the boat is working because I didn't want to be too far up because then I have the post right in my line of view when I'm looking sideways. Now I'm looking right out the window when I sit here. I like it. I'm really, really liking it. I should set up my crazy chair again. No, I don't think so. I like it. This is good. This is good. You see, and I can spin right around without too much. Yeah, I like it. I like it. Okay, this is all well and good and fun. Really fun. But now I got to figure out how I'm going to get the cable, the wire rope, from here to the rudder. Now, there's a lot of options and a lot of consideration, so I'm just going to brush the surface with you because it's something I've given an immense amount of thought to, and I've only just started because I haven't decided what I'm going to do. But I'll at least explain the problem. Okay, so basically, right off, there's chain that goes over here. Only 2 or 3 feet of chain because it's only got to be able to deal with 2 turns. And remember, that sprocket that's going on here will be significantly smaller. So the chain will loop over, and then it'll almost immediately switch through some shackles to the stainless steel wire rope, which will then have to be directed aft by the simplest route possible, but also the route that is the most practical for future maintenance, especially in an emergency situation, is most practical for not getting in the way of other things that I'm going to do with the boat, and there's a monkey wrench. Did I mention there's an upstairs helm? Yeah. So incorporating the cables from the upstairs helm, which I'll get into in a minute, has to be taken into account. And there's a lot to think about that too. But anyway, so right off the bat, where does it go? Does it go straight down through the floor? Well, if it goes straight down, I've made a mess of the possible storage space under here. So I think I'm going to try to take it sideways. Basically, I can't go too close because there won't be enough room for the chain before you get to the ship. So it's got to come down on an angle a bit. But of course I have a constraint with the angle that it can come off this. Lots of things to think about. Most likely it'll go there and then down. Now, the option here, let's go for a walk. So at first glance, you might think having it above the sole would be easier to maintain and get to in case of emergency. But there's so much cabinetry going here, it's going to be difficult to be sure to be able to get at that easily. In some ways, it might be easier to get under. It also might be easier port side because all the cabinetry over here, which is going to be the settee and stuff, is going to be modular and can be removed fairly easily. That saves us having to go behind the galley, which is a little more permanent, get through the bathroom, get in behind that dresser, which is semi-permanent, whereas on the port side, it's a lot easier on the whole. It does mean an extra shiv right here to get crossed over, plus there's another consideration. Okay, and here we are upstairs on the upper helm. I don't know if we've even been up here before. I can certainly show you some old pictures of it. Yeah, well, you can see the helm used to be on the port side here, and it was a god-awful thing. Now, I think I'm going to put the helm upstairs dead center, as it is in most modern trawlers. There's a bunch of reasons for that. We won't have to get into it right now. But as a result, running the cable, and along with that, the Morse control cables, gets a bit of a constraint because it has to go down past the window. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to build a helm, and I'm just going to put a nice big copper piece of pipe, copper tubing, right through the deck, that all of that can go straight through, straight down, nice and simple. Let's go down below and see where that'll pop out. It'll end up right here. Now this is all changing anyway, but it doesn't really matter. The point is having a small void right down here to carry the cables and the steering cables and the control cables is very, very suitable. There's even more to consider. And that's how do you even connect two sets of helms with chain and wire rope to one quadrant? I mean, the easiest way, by far, would be to run a single cable from one helm down around the back, around the quadrant, and then back up to the other helm. One long continuous cable, very, very simple, and only one cable rides back and forth across the quadrant. Would work perfectly, with the big exception that if it breaks in one place, the whole system is gone. One neat thing about having two helms is that you might as well take advantage of that opportunity to give yourself a little bit of redundancy. So two complete sets of cables onto the same quadrant is not ideal because, as you saw, there's only one gap in there, and that would mean 4 wires have to go across that quadrant. And it's a pretty big slot on the quadrant, but I don't think that's ideal either. Or it may be. I haven't decided yet. The other option is to basically have the two sets of cables joined together before they get to the quadrant. And so that working one helm turns the quadrant, and the quadrant effectively turns the other helm. Well, hello and welcome to this week's Beer of the Week. Today has been an unexpectedly gorgeous day for early October, and I'm making the absolute most of it. Well, sort of. At least I'm having a wonderful beer outside. So we're going back to what's becoming one of my favorite breweries, and that's the Four-Mile Brewery, which is actually a pub. It's a brew pub. It's just around the corner from here, and I've tried a few of their beers lately. This is the Mosaic Session IPA, and unfortunately I may have mentioned before, their website is down, and so there's no information online I can find out about this. But we'll give it I've had some terrible luck. This beer is really cold and unshaken, I think. The glass is also chilled, just to be sure we don't have a reenactment of last week's disaster. And let's pour as carefully as we possibly can. Okay, there we go. Well, it's a lovely color. Really, really nice. Oh, let's pour just a little head on the end. Okay, well let's see what we think of the Mosaic Session from the 4-Mile Pub. I love the color. Oh, I love the smell. Another brilliant beer from 4-Mile. It's a citrusy, floral IPA, but not super strong. Just nice, pleasant, full, really nice IPA. And I mean, there's so many IPAs, especially on the West Coast. It's a little crazy these days, but this is a very, very nice beer. So on that, let me thank two new patrons that came on this week. So grateful for them. Damian Weber Sr. and Mark Smith. Thank you both so much for coming aboard. And that brings us to, of course, the word of the week. Well, you probably saw it coming. Let's say the word of the week this week is helm. Now, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, if you'd like to win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt, I mentioned it in the opening sequence, just leave a comment down below with the word of the week, which is helm, H-E-L-M. And I'll draw at random from the first 24 hours worth of comments, and if you're the one that gets picked, I'll send you off a t-shirt. Cheers. See you next week. This is nice. This is really nice.